humiliation reserved exclusively for those marrying into old money. It isn't always shouted or violently expressed. Usually, it is whispered over crystal wine glasses or handed down through quiet, devastating family traditions. For Clara, the ultimate insult came on a rainy Friday evening in Newport, Rhode Island. Her haughty mother-in-law pointed her toward a cramped, drafty guest room in the servants' wing, while her husband was ushered into a lavish master suite. They thought she was a nobody. They thought she would quietly accept her subjugation. They had absolutely no idea who she really was, or that she legally held the royal deed to the very floor they were standing on. Clara Cavendish always knew that marrying Nathaniel Brooks would be complicated. Nathaniel was the golden boy of the Brooks family, a Boston banking dynasty whose lineage could allegedly be traced back to the Mayflower, though they preferred to measure their worth by the size of their trust funds and the exclusivity of their country clubs. Clara, on the other hand, was an archivist and botanical illustrator. She lived a quiet, unassuming life, raised by her grandfather, Arthur, in a modest cottage in upstate New York after her parents passed away when she was young. When Nathaniel and Clara met at a charity gala in Manhattan, she was there, cataloging historical documents for the host. He was there to write a tax-deductible check. Their connection was immediate. Nathaniel was charming, seemingly weary of his family's suffocating expectations, and drawn to Clara's grounded, genuine nature. For the first 2 years of their relationship, they lived in a bubble in New York City. But a wedding ring changed the rules of engagement. Once Clara became a Brooks, she was no longer just a quirky girlfriend. She was an institutional liability. The matriarch of the family, Eleanor Brooks, made her disdain known from the moment she first laid eyes on Clara's unbranded vintage dress. Eleanor was a woman carved from ice and diamonds, whose social currency was built on exclusion. She spoke in veiled insults, weaponizing etiquette to make Clara feel small. "It is so refreshing that Nathaniel chose someone who doesn't care about appearances," Eleanor had said at their rehearsal dinner, her eyes scanning Clara's simple pearl necklace. "Most girls would have insisted on proper heirloom jewelry for a wedding like this. But you make do with what you have. It's quaint." Clara had swallowed the insult, gripping Nathaniel's hand under the table. He had squeezed back, a silent promise that they were in this together. But as the months of their marriage wore on, Clara began to notice a shift in her husband. Whenever his family was involved, Nathaniel's backbone seemed to dissolve. He would excuse his mother's microaggressions, dismiss his sister Victoria's blatant rudeness, and tell Clara she was simply misunderstanding their sense of humor. The true test of their marriage arrived in late August, during the Brooks family's annual end-of-summer retreat to Highcliffe Manor. Highcliffe was a sprawling, Gilded-Age monstrosity perched on the cliffs of Newport, Rhode Island. It was the crown jewel of the Brooks estate, a 70-room mansion with manicured lawns, sweeping ocean views, and a history of hosting senators, diplomats, and old-world royalty. Attendance at the August retreat was mandatory for the family, a 2-week affair of sailing, cocktail parties, and relentless social maneuvering. Clara dreaded the trip. She had spent the weeks leading up to it, packing and repacking, trying to find clothes that wouldn't draw Victoria's sneers or Eleanor's backhanded compliments. To add to her stress, she was mourning. Her beloved grandfather, Arthur, had passed away peacefully in his sleep just 2 months prior. Clara was still untangling his affairs. He had left her everything he had, which she assumed consisted of his old books, his cottage, and a few modest savings accounts. His attorney, a man named Thomas Abernathy, from a prestigious London firm, had been trying to reach her for weeks, sending heavy, wax-sealed envelopes that Clara had been too grief-stricken to open. She had packed the latest bundle of documents in her leather tote bag, promising herself she would review them during the quiet moments in Newport. The drive up to Rhode Island was tense. Rain lashed against the windshield of Nathaniel's Range Rover, mirroring the dark knot forming in Clara's stomach. "Just try to play along this weekend, Clara," Nathaniel said, his eyes fixed on the slick road. "Mother is already stressed about hosting the regatta dinner on Saturday." Let's not give her any reasons to criticize. Clara turned to look at her husband, her heart sinking. Let's not give her any reasons. As if Clara's mere existence wasn't reason enough for Eleanor to sharpen her claws. I am always polite, Nathaniel. I'm not the one who initiates the hostility. I know, I know, he sighed, rubbing his temples. Just keep your head down. It's only 2 weeks. When the iron gates of Highcliffe Manor finally loomed out of the fog, Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp New England weather. The house was an imposing structure of gray stone and dark, sweeping roofs, looking more like a fortress than a summer home. As they pulled into the circular driveway, the heavy oak front doors swung open. A butler, flanked by 2 housekeepers, stepped out with umbrellas, and waiting in the grand foyer, holding a crystal glass of sherry, was Eleanor Brooks. The games were about to begin. The grand foyer of Highcliffe Manor smelled of lemon polish, old money, and sea salt. As Clara stepped inside, shaking the rain from her coat, Eleanor approached them with the grace of a predatory bird. She kissed Nathaniel warmly on both cheeks, her eyes lingering adoringly on her son. When she turned to Clara, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Clara, you look tired," Eleanor remarked smoothly, handing her empty glass to a passing maid. "The drive from the city must have been taxing. I suppose you aren't used to long journeys without a chauffeur." "The drive was fine, Eleanor," Clara replied evenly, keeping her voice steady. "Thank you for hosting us." "Of course. Family is everything to the Brooks," Eleanor said, emphasizing the word Brooks. "Now, the staff will take your luggage up. Nathaniel, darling, your usual suite is prepared. The Admiral suite in the West Wing. I had them air it out just the way you like." Nathaniel smiled, looking relieved. "Thanks, Mother. The Admiral suite is perfect." Clara waited for Eleanor to mention their shared room, but the older woman turned her attention back to the butler. "Thompson, please ensure Mrs. Brooks' bags are taken to the blue room in the East Wing." The silence that followed was so profound that Clara could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She blinked, her mind struggling to process what had just been said. The East Wing, the blue room. "Excuse me?" Clara said, her voice dropping an octave. "Did you say the blue room? Nathaniel and I are married. We share a room." Eleanor turned back to Clara, her expression one of practiced, polite confusion. "Oh, my dear, has Nathaniel not explained the Highcliffe traditions to you?" She looked at her son, her perfectly arched eyebrows raised. "Nathaniel, really, you must prepare your wife for these things." Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing a deep shade of crimson. He refused to meet Clara's eyes. "Clara, I meant to tell you, it's an old family rule. During the formal August retreat, only blood members of the Brooks family and their direct heirs sleep in the main family suites in the West Wing. Spouses usually stay in the East Wing until they've produced an heir." Clara stared at her husband, the blood rushing in her ears. She felt as though she had been slapped across the face. "You're joking. You are putting me in a separate wing of the house because I haven't given birth to a Brooks baby?" "It's not just you, Clara." Victoria, Nathaniel's sister, chimed in as she descended the sweeping marble staircase. She was wearing a cashmere sweater draped over her shoulders and a smirk on her lips. "When Aunt Margaret married Uncle Charles, she slept in the East Wing for 3 years until little Charlie was born. It's tradition. It honors the bloodline." Clara turned her gaze to the East Wing corridor. She knew what the East Wing was. Nathaniel had told her about it during a drunken, candid moment early in their relationship. The East Wing was historically the servants' quarters. It had been mildly renovated in the 1950s, but remained drafty, cramped, and completely disconnected from the luxurious grandeur of the rest of the house. The blue room was notoriously the smallest of them all, usually reserved for an overflow of distant, unliked cousins or personal assistants of wealthy guests. "Nathaniel," Clara said, her voice deadly quiet, cutting through the smugness of the room, "tell me we are not doing this." Nathaniel looked at his mother, then at Victoria, and finally at his shoes. "Clara, please, Let's not make a scene on the first night. It's just how things are done here. It's only for sleeping. We'll be together all day. Just go along with it. For me, the betrayal was a physical weight in Clara's chest. He wasn't going to stand up for her. He was going to let his family publicly humiliate her, treating her as a second-class citizen, a mere incubator, waiting to earn her place in their hollow dynasty. Fine, Clara whispered, her voice trembling not with tears, but with a cold, terrifying rage. She didn't look at Eleanor or Victoria. She simply picked up her heavy leather tote bag, the one containing her grandfather's unread letters, and turned to the butler. Thompson, please show me the way to the blue room. The walk to the east wing felt like a march to the gallows. The thick, plush carpets of the main house gave way to creaky hardwood floors. The intricate crown molding disappeared, replaced by plain, chipped paint. The blue room was exactly as she had imagined, a small, gloomy space with a single window overlooking the gravel parking area, a narrow twin bed, and a faded floral bedspread that smelled distinctly of mothballs and dampness. When Thompson closed the door behind him, leaving her alone, Clara dropped her bag onto the floor and sat on the edge of the stiff mattress. She didn't cry. The shock had bypassed sadness and settled directly into a profound, chilling clarity. Nathaniel had shown her exactly who he was, and the Brooks family had shown her exactly where she stood. She was an outsider, a commoner allowed in the castle only on their degrading terms. She spent the evening alone in the cold room. She skipped dinner, ignoring the half-hearted text message Nathaniel sent, claiming he had tried to bring her a plate, but his mother had insisted she probably just wanted to rest. Seeking a distraction from the gnawing anger in her stomach, Clara reached into her tote bag and pulled out the thick, wax-sealed envelopes from Thomas Abernathy. Her grandfather, Arthur, had been a quiet, gentle man who spent his days tending to his roses and reading historical biographies. He had never spoken of grand wealth or aristocratic lineages, but as Clara broke the seal on the first envelope and slid out the thick, vellum parchment inside, the trajectory of her entire life and the fate of the Brooks family was about to change forever. The rain battered against the single, rattling window of the blue room as Clara switched on the dim bedside lamp. The light cast long, dancing shadows across the cramped walls. She pulled her knees to her chest, unfolding the heavy documents with careful hands. The first page was a letter from Thomas Abernathy, senior partner at Abernathy, Carmichael and Associates, a law firm located in Mayfair, London. Dear Mrs. Brooks, it is with my deepest condolences that I write to you regarding the passing of your grandfather, Arthur Hugh Cavendish. However, it is imperative that we discuss the matters of his estate with the utmost urgency. I understand you have been grieving, but the contents of this package hold significant legal and financial implications that require your immediate attention. Your grandfather was a man who preferred a life of quiet anonymity in the United States. However, his true legal name was Lord Alistair Hugh Cavendish, the 11th Earl of Blackwood, and the sole surviving heir to the Cavendish Trust. As his only living descendant, you are now the primary beneficiary of the estate, the titles, where applicable, by descent, and the entirety of the Trust's land holdings. Clara stopped reading, her breath catching in her throat. Lord Alistair Hugh Cavendish, the 11th Earl of Blackwood? It had to be a mistake. Her grandfather was Arthur, the man who wore patched corduroy trousers and made terrible burnt toast on Sunday mornings. He couldn't be a British aristocrat, but as she sifted through the document's birth certificates, a massive family tree meticulously mapped out, and a certified copy of her grandfather's true will, the undeniable truth, stared back at her. Her grandfather had walked away from his aristocratic life in England after a devastating family tragedy in his youth, choosing to reinvent himself as a commoner in America. He had kept his identity a secret from everyone, including Clara's parents, to protect them from the crushing weight and toxic politics of old-world nobility. But it was the second envelope that made the blood freeze in Clara's veins. It was a thick, leather-bound folder embossed with gold lettering. Inside was a document that looked incredibly old, encased in a protective archival sleeve. The letter from Abernathy, attached to it read, Mrs. Brooks, I must draw your specific attention to the holdings of the Cavendish Trust in North America. In the late 18th century, the Crown granted your ancestors several large tracts of coastal land in New England. While much of this was sold over the centuries, one specific parcel was retained and placed into a nine-year land lease in the year 1927. The leaseholder is a family by the name of Brooks. Clara's hands began to shake violently. She read the words again and again. The land in question encompasses the entirety of the Newport Peninsula Cliffs, specifically the 40-acre estate currently known as Highcliffe Manor. The Brooks family owns the physical structure of the home, but the ground it sits upon is the exclusive freehold property of the Cavendish Trust. You, Clara, are the sole owner of that land. Clara scrambled through the pages, her eyes darting across legal jargon, property lines, and historical maps. There it was, the Royal Land Grant, originally drafted in 1762, validated and converted into a modern trust agreement. And attached to the back was a copy of the lease agreement signed by Nathaniel's great-grandfather, Harrison Brooks. She read the terms of the lease, and a cold, sharp smile spread across her face. The 9-year lease was not a standard agreement. It had been signed during the Great Depression when the Brooks family was briefly desperate for liquidity. In exchange for a massive upfront payment from the Cavendish estate, the Brooks had surrendered the freehold of the land, leasing it back for a nominal fee of $1 a year. But there was a catch. The lease had a strict expiration date, September 1st, 2026, next week. According to Abernathy's notes, the Brooks family had been trying to contact the elusive Cavendish Trust for the past 5 years to renegotiate or purchase the land back before the lease expired. Because Arthur had instructed his lawyers to ignore all correspondence from the Brooks family, perhaps out of a desire to remain hidden, or perhaps because he simply didn't care the lease had gone unrenewed. If a new agreement was not signed by September 1st, the terms of the original contract dictated that the land and any permanent structures built upon it would legally revert to the complete ownership of the Cavendish estate. Clara looked around the miserable, damp blue room, the peeling wallpaper, the tiny bed. She thought of Eleanor's smug face. She thought of Victoria's cruel laughter. And, most painfully, she thought of Nathaniel, the man who had promised to love and protect her, sleeping comfortably in his luxurious Admiral suite, while she was banished to the servants' quarters like an unwanted stray dog. They paraded around Highcliffe Manor like kings and queens of their own universe, looking down their noses at her because she lacked a pedigree. They enforced archaic, humiliating rules to put her in her place. They didn't own Highcliffe. She did. Clara carefully folded the documents and placed them back into the leather folder. She didn't feel like crying anymore. The crushing weight of the humiliation had vanished. Replaced by a quiet, vibrating power, she was Clara Cavendish, the granddaughter of the Earl of Blackwood, and the undisputed owner of the ground beneath Eleanor Brooks's expensive Italian leather shoes. She lay back on the uncomfortable twin bed, staring up at the water-stained ceiling. The weekend was just beginning. The Brooks family was preparing to host the social event of the season, a massive gala where they would flaunt their wealth and status to the elite of New England. Clara decided she would not cause a scene tonight. She would not storm into the West Wing and demand a better room. She would play the dutiful, quiet, commoner wife. She would let Eleanor and Victoria revel in their perceived superiority. She would let Nathaniel believe he had successfully managed his difficult wife. She would let them climb to the very peak of their arrogant pedestal, because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be when she finally pulled the ground out from under them. Clara reached over and turned off the small bedside lamp. For the first time since she had arrived at Highcliffe Manor, she closed her eyes and slept soundly. The morning sun did little to warm the damp chill of the blue room. Clara awoke to the sound of seagulls crying over the Atlantic, her body stiff from the unforgiving mattress. For a fleeting second, the events of the previous night felt like a bizarre, terrible nightmare. But as her eyes adjusted to the peeling wallpaper, and she saw the heavy leather briefcase tucked safely beneath her open suitcase, the reality of her newfound power settled over her like a heavy velvet cloak. She was no longer the helpless, out-of-place archivist trying to win the approval of a family that despised her. She was Clara Cavendish, and she held the keys to their kingdom. She dressed carefully, choosing a simple navy linen dress, and applied her makeup with a steady hand. When she finally descended the creaking stairs of the East Wing and navigated her way to the bright, sun-drenched morning room, the contrast was jarring. The morning room smelled of fresh espresso and cut lilies. Eleanor, Victoria, and Nathaniel were already seated around a mahogany table, picking at imported fruit and reading the morning papers. "Good morning," Clara said, her voice bright and untroubled. Nathaniel looked up, a flash of guilt crossing his features before he offered a tight smile. "Morning, Clara. Did you sleep well?" "Like a stone," she replied, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the silver carafe. She took a seat directly across from Eleanor. The East Wing is wonderfully quiet. It gives one a lot of time to think. Eleanor didn't look up from her tablet. "I'm glad you've found a way to appreciate it. The staff is usually quite content over there. Now, Nathaniel, we need to finalize the seating chart for Saturday's regatta gala. Governor Hayes cannot sit next to the Montgomerys. You know their history." As Eleanor droned on about the social logistics, Clara casually buttered a piece of toast, watching them. The arrogance was palpable, but beneath it, Clara noticed something she hadn't seen before. A subtle, vibrating tension. Nathaniel kept checking his phone, his leg bouncing nervously under the table. Even Victoria, usually languid and detached, was obsessively biting her thumbnail. "Mother, has Mr. Preston called back?" Nathaniel interrupted, his voice hushed. Mr. Preston was the Brooks family's lead attorney. Eleanor's jaw tightened. She shot a warning glance toward Clara, but Clara pretended to be entirely engrossed in her blackberry jam. "No, Nathaniel, he hasn't. But I refuse to ruin my morning worrying about bureaucratic incompetence. It will be handled. The Brooks family has held Highcliffe for generations. We aren't going to let some faceless, foreign trust fund push us around over a technicality." Clara took a slow sip of her coffee to hide her smile. A technicality. That was what they were calling the expiration of the 9-year land lease. "If they don't answer by Saturday midnight, it goes into default, Mother," Victoria snapped, dropping her pretense of calm. "Do you realize what that means? We could lose the grounds. We couldn't even walk out the front door without trespassing." "Keep your voice down, Victoria," Eleanor hissed, her eyes darting to Clara. "This is a private family matter." Clara wiped her mouth with a linen napkin and stood up, the picture of innocent oblivion. "Is everything all right? If you have family business to discuss, I can take my coffee out to the gardens. I wouldn't want to intrude on anything permanent." Nathaniel sighed, rubbing his face. "It's fine, Clara. Just some boring real estate paperwork regarding the estate's boundaries. Nothing you need to worry about." "All right," Clara said softly. "I'll be out on the cliffs if you need me." She walked out through the French doors, the sea breeze instantly whipping her hair around her face. Once she was safely out of earshot, standing at the very edge of the manicured lawn where it met the rugged Rhode Island cliffs, Clara pulled out her phone. She dialed the international number on Thomas Abernathy's letterhead. It rang twice before a crisp, British voice answered. "Abernathy, Carmichael, and Associates. Thomas Abernathy speaking." "Mr. Abernathy," Clara said, the wind threatening to steal her words. "This is Clara Brooks, or rather, Clara Cavendish." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Lady Clara, thank heavens. I have been trying to reach you for weeks. Please accept my most profound condolences for your grandfather's passing. Lord Alistair was a remarkable man. Thank you, Thomas. I've read the documents. All of them. Then you understand the gravity of the situation regarding the North American holdings. Abernathy said, his tone turning strictly professional. Specifically, the Highcliffe Estate lease. It expires on Saturday, September 1st, at precisely midnight. The Brooks family's legal counsel has been bombarding our offices with frantic offers. They are willing to pay an astronomical sum to renew the lease for another 50 years. Clara looked back over her shoulder at the sprawling, arrogant mass of Highcliffe Manor. She saw Eleanor barking orders at a gardener through a window. She thought of the cold, damp, blue room. "Thomas," Clara said, her voice as hard as the stones beneath her feet, "I do not want their money." "I see," Abernathy replied carefully. "May I ask what your instructions are, Lady Clara? If we do not execute a renewal agreement by Saturday midnight, the entire property, including the physical structures built upon it, reverts to your absolute ownership by default." "I know," Clara said. "I want you to ignore all correspondence from their lawyers. But I need you to send a representative to Highcliffe Manor this Saturday night. Someone official. Send them to the gala." "A representative to do what, exactly?" "To inform them," Clara smiled coldly, "that their lease has not been renewed, and the new owner of the estate is ready to take possession." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of frantic preparations. The Brooks family was preparing to host 300 of New England's most elite socialites for the annual end-of-summer regatta gala. Delivery trucks constantly rumbled up the gravel driveway, unloading thousands of white hydrangeas, crates of vintage champagne, and a small army of caterers. Throughout it all, Clara played her part flawlessly. She stayed out of Eleanor's way, nodded politely at Victoria's barbed comments about her quaint upstate upbringing, and accepted Nathaniel's half-hearted apologies for neglecting her. Nathaniel was a ghost, consumed by hushed phone calls and panicked meetings with his mother in the library. He had completely abandoned Clara to the isolation of the East Wing, only seeking her out when he needed to keep up the appearance of a happily married man in front of the staff. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy, oppressive humidity. Clara stood in front of the small, spotted mirror in the blue room, smoothing down the skirts of her gown. She had forgone the extravagant, sequined monstrosities that Victoria and Eleanor favored. Instead, she wore a vintage, floor-length gown of deep emerald silk that had belonged to her grandmother. It was understated, elegant, and commanded a quiet, undeniable presence. Around her neck, she wore a simple gold locket containing a picture of Arthur. When she walked down the grand staircase to join the party, the foyer was already packed with men in tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Nathaniel was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. For a moment, when he looked up and saw her, genuine admiration flashed in his eyes. "You look stunning, Clara." "Thank you, Nathaniel," she said, her voice cool and detached. She took his offered arm, feeling nothing but the rough fabric of his tuxedo sleeve. The man she had loved was gone, replaced by this weak, anxious stranger who cared more about his mother's approval than his wife's dignity. "Listen," Nathaniel whispered as they walked toward the ballroom. "Mother is on edge tonight. There's a business deal that might fall through at midnight. Just smile, mingle, and for God's sake, don't bring up the sleeping arrangements if anyone asks." "I wouldn't dream of it," Clara replied smoothly. The gala was a masterclass in superficiality. Clara floated through the crowd, a perfect, quiet accessory on Nathaniel's arm. She listened to senators boast about their golf handicaps and watched Eleanor hold court near the champagne tower, looking like a queen defending her castle. But Eleanor's usual iron composure was cracking. Her eyes constantly darted to the grand entrance, checking the grandfather clock that stood ominously in the hall. It was 10:30 p.m. At 11:15 p.m., the heavy oak doors opened, and a man stepped into the foyer. He didn't fit in. He wore a sharp, modern charcoal suit rather than a tuxedo, and he carried a sleek, leather briefcase. He looked around the opulent room with an expression of mild, professional boredom. Clara watched from across the room as Eleanor spotted him. The matriarch's face went pale. She immediately grabbed Nathaniel's arm, digging her manicured nails into his sleeve, and hissed something in his ear. Nathaniel's eyes widened, and the two of them, along with Victoria, hastily made their way toward the newcomer. Clara excused herself from a conversation with an elderly judge and quietly followed them, slipping into the shadows of the hallway as Eleanor corralled the man into the private family library, shutting the heavy mahogany doors behind them. Clara moved quickly. She approached the library doors, pressing her hand against the cool wood. It was time. Inside the library, Eleanor's voice was pitched high, with barely suppressed panic. "You must be from Abernathy's firm in London. I am Eleanor Brooks. We have been trying to reach your office for weeks. We have the revised contracts ready, and we are prepared to wire the funds for the lease extension immediately. You're cutting it terribly close, Mr. Donovan," the man's voice replied smoothly. "Arthur Donovan, junior partner at Abernathy, Carmichael and Associates. And please, Mrs. Brooks, there is no need for panic. I am here to finalize the matters of the Cavendish Trust regarding the Highcliffe estate." "Thank God," Nathaniel breathed. "Do you have the paperwork? My lawyers are on standby to execute the wire transfer." "I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding, Mr. Brooks," Donovan said, his tone chillingly polite. "I am not here to accept your money, nor am I here to renew the lease." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the library. "Excuse me?" Eleanor's voice trembled. "What do you mean you aren't renewing? We are offering triple the market value for the land. You cannot possibly evict us from our own family home. Technically, Mrs. Brooks, it is only your physical structure. The ground, the gardens, the cliffs, and the access roads belong entirely to the trust. As per the 1927 agreement, upon the expiration of the lease at midnight tonight, the structure forfeits to the landowner. You will have 30 days to vacate the premises before the locks are changed." "This is outrageous," Victoria screamed. "Who is running this trust? We demand to speak to them directly. Who is this Lord Cavendish?" "Lord Cavendish passed away 2 months ago," Donovan explained calmly. "The entire estate, including this property, has passed to his sole surviving heir. I cannot negotiate with you because I do not have the authority. Only the new head of the trust can decide the fate of Highcliffe Manor." "Then get them on the phone," Eleanor commanded, her aristocratic facade entirely shattered. "I don't care what time zone they are in. Get this heir on the phone right now and tell them the Brooks family demands a negotiation." "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Brooks." Clara turned the brass handle and pushed the heavy mahogany doors open. The hinges groaned slightly, drawing the eyes of everyone in the room. She stepped into the dim light of the library, her emerald silk gown rustling softly against the Persian rug. Nathaniel frowned, stepping forward. "Clara, what are you doing in here? This is a private, highly confidential legal meeting. You need to leave. Go back to the party." Eleanor glared at her, furious at the intrusion. "For heaven's sake, Clara, have you absolutely no sense of boundaries? Get out." Clara ignored them. She walked straight past her husband and her mother-in-law, stopping only when she stood beside Mr. Donovan. She turned to face the Brooks family, her posture perfectly straight, her eyes locked onto Eleanor's horrified, confused face. "Mr. Donovan," Clara said, her voice ringing clear and authoritative in the silent room, "have you informed my tenants that their lease has expired?" The heavy mahogany doors of the library seemed to absorb the sounds of the gala outside, leaving only a thick, suffocating silence in their wake. For a long moment, nobody moved. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with a sudden, unpredictable electricity. Eleanor Brooks was the first to break the silence. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh, waving a dismissive hand covered in diamond rings. "Clara, really, this is neither the time nor the place for whatever bizarre performance art you're attempting. Mr. Donovan and I are discussing multi-million-dollar estate matters. Go back to the ballroom, now." Clara didn't move an inch. She didn't shrink under Eleanor's furious glare. Instead, she turned her gaze to the junior partner. "Mr. Donovan, would you kindly clarify the situation for Mrs. Brooks? She seems to be laboring under a misapprehension regarding my authority." Donovan straightened his charcoal suit jacket, opening his leather briefcase to extract a thick, gold-embossed folder. He placed it delicately on the center of the mahogany desk. "Mrs. Brooks," Donovan said, his voice entirely devoid of emotion, "there is no misapprehension. Allow me to formally introduce my client, Lady Clara Cavendish, the 12th Countess of Blackwood, and the sole legal head of the Cavendish Trust. She is the undisputed, absolute owner of the 40 acres of coastal land beneath your feet." Nathaniel took a step back, bumping into a bookshelf. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. "Clara, what is he talking about? Your grandfather was a botanist. He lived in a 2-bedroom cottage in upstate New York. He drove a rusted Volvo." "My grandfather was Lord Alistair Hugh Cavendish," Clara corrected, her voice chillingly calm. "He abhorred the toxicity of aristocratic privilege and chose a life of quiet, honest labor over the hollow vanity of high society, a concept I know this family struggles to comprehend." Victoria scoffed, though her hands were trembling violently as she clutched her cashmere shawl. "This is a fraud. You forged those documents. You've always been a gold-digging little nobody, and now you're trying to extort us." "Victoria, darling," Clara smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression that made the younger woman flinch. "Extortion implies I want your money. I don't. I want my property." Eleanor's chest heaved as she stepped forward, the mask of the untouchable matriarch finally cracking, revealing the desperate, terrified woman underneath. "You can't do this, Clara. We are family. You are a Brooks. Highcliffe has been in this family for generations. You cannot simply walk in here and declare yourself the owner of our home." "Your home?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "That's fascinating, Eleanor, because just yesterday you made it exceptionally clear that I am not part of this family. You reminded me that I lack the proper bloodline. You banished me to the servants' quarters to honor your sacred traditions." Clara took a slow, deliberate step toward her mother-in-law. "Let's talk about those traditions," Clara continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You put me in a drafty, miserable box in the East Wing because you believed I was beneath you. You thought you could humiliate me into submission. You thought you were the queen of this castle, Eleanor. But the truth is, you're just a tenant with a severely overdue bill." Nathaniel, sweating profusely, suddenly grabbed Clara's arm. "Clara, please, stop this. We're married. We are a team. Whatever land you've inherited, it belongs to both of us. We can just, Mother way. We can just sign the renewal together. I'll talk to Mother. I'll get you the Admiral's suite. I'll make sure you're treated with the respect you deserve." Clara looked down at Nathaniel's hand on her arm. The revulsion she felt was absolute. She yanked her arm away, stepping back to stand beside Donovan. "Respect isn't something you negotiate when you're backed into a corner, Nathaniel," Clara said, her eyes blazing. "And as for what belongs to both of us, I believe we need to discuss our prenuptial agreement." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Yes," Clara nodded, her eyes locked on Eleanor. "The ironclad prenuptial agreement your mother forced me to sign 2 weeks before our wedding. Do you remember the terms, Nathaniel?" "I certainly do." Clara turned to Mr. Donovan, signaling him to continue. The lawyer pulled a single sheet of paper from his file. "According to the Brooks family prenuptial agreement, drafted by your own legal counsel," Donovan read aloud, "any and all inherited wealth, titles, landholdings, or trusts acquired by either party before or during the marriage remain the exclusive, undisputed property of the inheriting spouse. In the event of a divorce, the non-inheriting spouse is entitled to 0% of said assets." Donovan placed the paper on the desk. "Your mother drafted this to ensure Lady Clara could never touch a dime of the Brooks family fortune. Ironically, it has perfectly shielded the multi-billion-dollar Cavendish Trust from you." Nathaniel stumbled back, dropping into a leather armchair, as if his legs had given out. He buried his face in his hands. Eleanor was shaking violently now, her perfectly styled hair suddenly looking severe and haggard. "What do you want, Clara? Name your price. We will double the lease fee. We will give you a seat on the Brooks banking board. Just, please, you cannot evict us. The social scandal, it would ruin us." "Here is what is going to happen," Clara announced, completely ignoring Eleanor's pleas. She listed her terms with brutal efficiency. Asterisk, the default. At exactly midnight tonight, your 9-year lease expires. The land, and by the laws of the 1927 agreement, the physical structures built upon it, including Highcliffe Manor, will legally revert to the Cavendish Trust. Asterisk, the eviction. You have exactly 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate the premises. Mr. Donovan will oversee the transition. If you attempt to vandalize, strip, or damage the property, I will tie up your bank accounts in litigation for the rest of your natural lives. Asterisk, the gala. You will return to your party out there, you will smile, you will pour champagne, and you will pretend everything is perfectly fine until the last guest leaves. You will not ruin my house with your public weeping. 30 days? Victoria shrieked, tears of sheer panic ruining her mascara. Where are we supposed to go? Our Boston townhouse is being renovated. We have nowhere to put all our things. I hear the blue room in the East Wing is available, Clara said deadpan, though I wouldn't recommend the mattress. The heavy, brass pendulum of the grand hallway clock swung with a terrifying finality. Bong. The first strike of midnight reverberated through the thick mahogany walls of the library, cutting through the stunned silence like a gavel striking wood. Bong. Clara did not wait to watch the Brooks family disintegrate any further. She had delivered her verdict, and the execution of their vanity was no longer her concern. Turning her back on their pale, horrified faces, she let the heavy library doors click shut behind her. The sound severed her completely from the toxic labyrinth of their dynasty. As she walked back down the opulent main corridor, the juxtaposition of the house was almost cinematic. From the grand ballroom to her left, the lively, oblivious sounds of a string quartet playing a sweeping waltz spilled out into the foyer. 300 of New England's wealthiest socialites were currently sipping vintage champagne, laughing at terrible jokes, and wholly unaware that their haughty hosts had just been legally rendered homeless. Clara didn't pause to mingle. She bypassed the sweeping marble staircase, leading to the luxurious West Wing, the wing she was never deemed worthy enough to inhabit, and made her way down the narrow, uncarpeted hallway to the East Wing. When she stepped back into the blue room, the chill of the space hit her differently. Just hours ago, the peeling floral wallpaper, the drafty single-pane window, and the narrow, stiff twin bed had felt like a meticulously designed prison meant to break her spirit. Now, the room was nothing more than a temporary waiting area. The smell of mothballs and damp wood no longer held any power over her. Clara opened her scuffed leather suitcase on the miserable little bed and began to pack. She folded her modest linen dresses and soft cardigans with a methodical, soothing rhythm. A profound, buoyant lightness had taken root in her chest. The crushing, suffocating weight of trying to twist herself into a shape that the Brooks family might finally accept had vanished entirely. She was Clara Cavendish. She was exactly who she was supposed to be. The floorboards in the hallway groaned. A moment later, the cheap wooden door of the blue room pushed open. Nathaniel stood in the doorframe, looking as though he had physically aged 10 years in the span of 20 minutes. His expensive, tailored tuxedo hung awkwardly on his frame, his bow tie was undone, and his eyes were completely bloodshot. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy of Boston banking had been reduced to a frantic, trembling mess. "Clara, please," he choked out, stepping into the cramped space. He reached out, his hands hovering in the air as if he wanted to touch her, but was too terrified of the consequence. "Please, don't do this. Don't throw our entire marriage away over a petty, vindictive revenge. I know you're angry. You have every right to be angry, but we can fix this. I love you." Clara paused, her hands resting on a folded sweater. She looked at her husband, truly looked at him, stripping away the handsome charm and the familiar smile she had once fallen in love with. Beneath it all, she saw nothing but a frightened, spineless little boy who had spent his entire life hiding behind his mother's wealth and his family's manufactured prestige. "You do not love me, Nathaniel," Clara said softly. Her voice carried no malice, only a cold, clinical certainty. You loved the idea of a quiet, unassuming wife who would make you feel grounded, someone who wouldn't challenge your family's suffocating authority. You wanted an accessory, a pet. That's not true. I stood by you. You let me sleep in a servant's quarters, Nathaniel, she stated, her eyes locking onto his with an unyielding intensity. You watched your mother point me toward this damp, miserable box, and you nodded along. You drank vintage scotch in your luxurious Admiral suite, while I shivered under a moth-eaten blanket. You let your sister insult my upbringing. You let your mother degrade my very existence. And you only miraculously found your backbone the exact second you realized I held the royal deed to your inheritance. Nathaniel swallowed hard, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes. I was weak. I admit it, Clara. I was a coward. But we took vows, for richer or poorer. Remember? We are a team. Whatever land you've inherited, it belongs to both of us now. We can fire my mother's lawyers. We can sign the renewal together. You can have the master suite. We can rule Highcliffe together. Just you and me. Clara actually smiled. A tragic, hollow expression. You still don't get it. Respect isn't something you get to desperately negotiate when you're backed into a corner and staring down the barrel of an eviction notice. And as for what belongs to both of us, I suggest you reread the documents your mother so viciously forced upon me. Nathaniel blanched, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. Yes, Clara nodded, zipping her suitcase shut with a sharp, decisive sound. Eleanor's masterpiece of paranoia, the ironclad prenuptial agreement she made me sign 2 weeks before our wedding to ensure the gold-digging commoner could never touch a dime of the Brooks fortune. It clearly states that any inherited landholdings acquired by either party remain their exclusive, undisputed property in the event of a divorce. She dug your grave, Nathaniel. I am simply refusing to pull you out of it. She picked up her suitcase in one hand and her heavy leather tote bag, the one containing her grandfather's legacy, the Cavendish Trust documents, and her freedom in the other. I am filing for divorce on Monday morning, Clara said, stepping around him toward the door. My legal team in London will be in touch with Mr. Preston. Tell your mother she has exactly 30 days to pack up her crystal and vacate my property. It's going to be a very swift, very clean break. Nathaniel stepped aside, leaning heavily against the peeling wallpaper, too utterly defeated to argue. Clara walked out of the blue room, leaving him alone in the drafty silence. She descended the creaking stairs of the east wing for the very last time. When she pushed open the heavy oak front doors of Highcliffe Manor, the coastal storm had completely passed. The Rhode Island sky was crisp, clear, and ablaze, with a million brilliant stars. Mr. Donovan was waiting for her in a sleek, black town car, idling on the gravel driveway. As the driver opened the door for her, Clara slid into the plush leather seat and looked up at the sprawling, imposing stone mansion one last time. It was no longer a fortress designed to keep her out. It was a blank canvas. 6 months later, the spring thaw brought a spectacular, vibrant bloom to the rugged coastal cliffs of Newport. The scandalous, unprecedented eviction of the Brooks family from Highcliffe Manor had dominated the society pages of the Boston Globe and the New York Times for months. It was a spectacular fall from grace that high society consumed with absolute, unbridled schadenfreude. Eleanor, Victoria, and Nathaniel had been forced to retreat in utter disgrace to a heavily mortgaged, cramped 3-bedroom condominium in a noisy, undesirable neighborhood in Boston. Their social standing had evaporated overnight. The elite circles they had so fiercely and cruelly guarded instantly turned their backs on them, mocking the revelation that the arrogant Brooks dynasty had been effectively squatting on borrowed aristocratic land for nearly a century. Eleanor was reportedly shunned at her country club, and Victoria's wealthy fiancé had promptly called off their engagement. Clara, however, had been exceptionally busy. She stood on the grand, sweeping stone terrace of Highcliffe, wearing a comfortable pair of denim overalls, a canvas sun hat, and holding a clipboard. The imposing, dreary Gilded Age monstrosity had undergone a breathtaking metamorphosis. The heavy, oppressive velvet drapes had been torn down, letting the brilliant, restorative coastal sunlight flood every corner of the estate. The West Wing, once fiercely reserved exclusively for the pure-blooded Brooks heirs, had been completely gutted and converted into a state-of-the-art botanical research facility and public library. It was now open, entirely free of charge, to scholars, archivists, and students from around the world. The grand ballroom, where Eleanor had once hosted her superficial, exclusionary galas, now housed a massive, interactive, public exhibit on local marine ecology and historical land preservation. Clara had legally and permanently renamed the estate the Arthur Cavendish Botanical Foundation. "Excuse me, Lady Clara." Clara turned from the terrace railing to see Thompson. The former Brooks family butler, whom Clara had immediately rehired and promoted to estate manager at double his previous salary, was walking toward her. He carried a silver tray holding a pitcher of freshly brewed iced tea. "Just Clara is fine, Thompson. You know that." She smiled warmly, setting her clipboard down on a patio table. "Of course, Clara," Thompson smiled back. The tight, anxious, subservient posture he had been forced to maintain under Eleanor's tyrannical reign was completely gone. He looked relaxed, healthy, and genuinely happy. "I just wanted to let you know that the new shipment of heirloom English rose bushes has arrived from London. The landscaping team is preparing to plant them outside the East Wing." "Wonderful," Clara said, accepting a cold glass of tea. "Please tell the foreman to be gentle with the roots. The coastal soil is still a bit rocky on that side." Clara took a sip of her tea and let her gaze drift toward the East Wing. The transformation there was perhaps her favorite achievement. She had overseen the renovations personally. The drafty walls had been heavily insulated, the ancient plumbing ripped out and modernized, and the peeling, depressing wallpaper replaced with bright, vibrant, breathable paint. The cramped, degrading servant quarters had been turned into luxurious, welcoming guest suites for visiting artists and scientists. And the blue room was gone. Clara had knocked down the walls, separating it from the adjacent storage closets, expanding the space tenfold. In its place was Clara's personal botanical illustration and design studio. It featured massive, floor-to-ceiling bay windows that provided an unobstructed, sweeping view of the Atlantic Ocean. The space was warm, fiercely independent, and constantly filled with the rich scent of fresh potting soil, blooming hydrangeas, and watercolor paints. She took a deep breath of the salty sea air, the coastal breeze playfully ruffling the loose hair, escaping her sun hat. She had walked through the iron gates of Highcliffe Manor as an outsider, a commoner forced to sleep in the cold shadows of someone else's towering arrogance. She had been tested, belittled, and pushed to the very margins, but she had emerged as the master of her own extraordinary destiny. She had torn down a century-old legacy of exclusion and cruelty to build a future rooted in growth, light, and unquestionable, quiet power. Some families build their empires on vanity and the degradation of others. Clara Cavendish had decided to build hers on the firm, unyielding ground of truth, and as she looked out over the empire she had rightfully reclaimed, Clara decided that the view from the top had never been more beautiful. What an absolutely satisfying turn of events. Clara's journey from a belittled outsider to the master of the manor proves that true power doesn't come from loud arrogance, but from quiet strength and knowing exactly who you are. The Brooks family learned the hard way that entitlement is a fragile house of cards, easily blown away when the real owner comes to collect the rent. Clara, turning their snobby estate into a botanical foundation for her grandfather, is the ultimate classy revenge. If you loved watching Clara flip the script and serve this aristocratic family a massive dose of humble pie, please like this video, share it with anyone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible, real-life drama stories.